The prices of the things we need to live, food, fuel, housing, pretty much everything, have suddenly exploded higher this year. Are we about to...
Hello everyone, welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Today, we will be talking about the difference between inflation and deflation. Enjoy the video. First off, inflation. What is inflation? Inflation is a quantitative measure of how quickly the price of goods in an economy is increasing. Inflation is caused when goods and services are in high demand, thus creating a drop in availability. Supplies can decrease for many reasons. A natural disaster can wipe out a food crop, a housing boom can exhaust building supplies, etc. Whatever the reason, consumers are willing to pay more for the items they want, causing manufacturers and service providers to charge more. The most common measure of inflation is the Consumer Price Index, CPI. The CPI is a theoretical basket of goods, including consumer goods and services, medical care, and transportation costs. The government tracks the price of the goods and services in the basket to get an understanding of the purchasing power of the US dollar. Inflation is often seen as a big threat, mostly by people who came of age during the late 1970s when inflation ran wild. So-called hyperinflations occur when the increase in monthly prices exceeds 50% over some period of time. These periods of rapid price increases are often accompanied by a breakdown in the underlying real economy and may also see a sudden increase in the money supply. While hyperinflations can be scary, they are historically rare. In reality, inflation can be either good or bad, depending on the reasons and level of inflation. In fact, a complete lack of inflation can be quite bad for the economy, as we will see below with deflation. A modest amount of inflation can actually encourage spending and investing, as inflation can slowly erode the buying power of cash, so it is relatively less expensive to buy that $1,000 appliance today than the same $1,000 in a year. Now, let's move on to deflation. Deflation occurs when too many goods are available or when there is not enough money circulating to purchase those goods. As a result, the price of goods and services drops. For instance, if a particular type of car becomes highly popular, other manufacturers start to make a similar vehicle to compete. Soon, car companies have more of that vehicle style than they can sell, so they must drop the price to sell the cars. Companies that find themselves stuck with too much inventory must cut costs, which often leads to layoffs. Unemployed individuals do not have enough money available to purchase items. To coax them into buying, prices get lowered, which continues the trend. Note that deflation is not the same as disinflation, which is a decline in the positive rate of inflation from period to period. When credit providers detect a decrease in prices, they often reduce the amount of credit they offer. This creates a credit crunch where consumers cannot access loans to purchase big-ticket items, leaving companies with overstocked inventory and causing further deflation. Prolonged periods of deflation can stunt economic growth and increase unemployment. Japan's lost decade is a recent example of the negative effects of deflation. Just as out-of-control hyperinflation is bad, uncontrolled price declines can lead to damaging a deflationary spiral. This situation typically occurs during periods of economic crisis, such as a recession or depression, as economic output slows and demand for investment and consumption dries up. This may lead to an overall decline in asset prices, as producers are forced to liquidate inventories that people no longer want to buy. Consumers and businesses alike begin holding on to liquid money reserves to cushion against further financial loss. As more money is saved, less money is spent, further decreasing aggregate demand. At this point, people's expectations regarding future inflation are also lowered, and they begin to hoard money. Consumers have less incentive to spend money today when they can reasonably expect that their money will have more purchasing power tomorrow. Now we have the question, is inflation a good thing? When the economy is not running at capacity, meaning there is unused labor or resources, inflation theoretically helps increase production. More dollars translates to more spending, which equates to more aggregated demand. More demand, in turn, triggers more production to meet that demand. British economist John Maynard Keynes believes that some inflation was necessary to prevent the paradox of thrift, which says if consumer prices are allowed to fall consistently because the country is becoming too productive, consumers learn to hold off their purchases to wait for a better deal. The net effect of this paradox is to reduce aggregate demand, leading to less production, layoffs, and a faltering economy. Inflation also makes it easier on debtors, who repay their loans with money that is less valuable than the money they borrowed. This encourages borrowing and lending, which again increases spending on all levels. Perhaps most important to the Federal Reserve is that the U.S. government is the largest debtor in the world, and inflation helps soften the blow of its massive debt. Economists once believed an inverse relationship existed between inflation and unemployment, and that rising unemployment could be fought with increased inflation. This relationship was defined in the famous Phillips curve. The Phillips curve was largely discredited in the 1970s, when the U.S. experienced stagflation. Deflation is measured by a decrease in the Consumer Price Index, but the CPI does not measure stock prices, an important economic indicator. For example, retirees use stocks to fund purchases. Businesses use them to fund growth. In other words, when the stock market drops, the CPI might be missing one important indicator of deflation as it's felt in people's pocketbooks. Comprehensive awareness of this economic indicator is important for effectively gauging whether or not a dramatic dip in the stock market will cause a recession. Neither does the CPI include sales prices of homes. Instead, it calculates the monthly equivalent of owning a home, which it derives from rents. This is misleading since rental prices are likely to drop when there is a high vacancy. That's usually when interest rates are low and housing prices are rising. Conversely, when home prices are dropping due to high interest rates, rents tend to increase. There are 3 reasons why deflation exists as a greater threat than inflation since 2000. First, exports from China have kept prices low. The country has a lower standard of living, so it can pay its workers less. China also keeps its exchange rate pegged to the dollar, which keeps its exports competitive. Second, in the 21st century, technology such as computers keeps workers' productivity high. Most information can be retrieved in seconds from the internet. Workers don't have to spend time tracking it down. The switch from snail mail to email streamlined business communications. Third, the excess of aging baby boomers allows corporations to keep wages low. Many boomers have remained in the workforce because they can't afford to retire. They are willing to accept lower wages to supplement their incomes. These lower costs mean companies haven't needed to raise prices. Deflation slows economic growth. As prices fall, people put off purchases. They hope they can get a better deal later. You've probably experienced this yourself when thinking about getting a new cell phone, iPad, or TV. You might wait until next year to get this year's model for less. That puts pressure on manufacturers to constantly lower prices and develop new products. That's good for consumers like you. But constant cost-cutting means lower wages and less investment spending. That's why only companies with a fanatic, loyal following like Apple really succeed in the market. To combat deflation, the Federal Reserve stimulates the economy with expansionary monetary policy. It reduces the Fed funds rate target and buys treasuries, using its open market operations. When needed, the Fed uses other tools to increase the money supply. When it increases liquidity in the economy, people often wonder whether the Fed is printing money. Anyways, that's it for this video. It sure was informative, so I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. Goodbye!